The fluorescent lights of Riverside Mall flickered above as Thomas Chen knelt beside his daughter Emma, his hands trembling as he searched through her backpack. The small purple inhaler that was supposed to be in the front pocket wasn't there. His heart hammered against his ribs as Emma's breathing grew more labored, her small chest heaving with effort as shoppers hurried past them near the food court. "Daddy, I can't breathe," she wheezed, her 7-year-old face contorted with panic. Thomas had been a single father for 3 years, ever since his wife passed away from cancer. And in that time, he'd learned to handle scraped knees, bad dreams and forgotten homework. But this was different. This was life and death. And the inhaler that should have been in Emma's backpack was sitting on their kitchen counter 15 minutes away. As Emma's lips began to tint blue, Thomas felt the world closing in around him. He was about to scream for help when a woman's voice cut through his panic, like a lighthouse beam through fog. "She's having an asthma attack. I have an inhaler." Thomas looked up to see a young woman in an expensive, cream-colored blazer and designer jeans, her dark hair pulled back in a sleek ponytail. She was already kneeling beside them, pulling out an inhaler from her Louis Vuitton purse. But Thomas noticed her hands were shaking too. "Please," Thomas managed to choke out. The woman didn't hesitate. She positioned herself next to Emma, her voice suddenly calm and authoritative despite the tremor in her hands. "Sweetheart, I need you to try to breathe slowly with me. In through your nose, out through your mouth. Can you do that?" Emma nodded weakly, her small hand gripping Thomas's shirt. The woman administered the inhaler with practiced precision, counting the puffs, timing them perfectly, encouraging Emma between each one. Thomas watched in amazement as his daughter's breathing gradually began to ease, the terrible wheezing starting to subside. Color slowly returned to Emma's cheeks. "That's it, good girl," the woman murmured, her own eyes glistening with unshed tears. "You're doing so well." 5 minutes felt like 5 hours, but finally Emma was breathing normally again. She slumped against Thomas, exhausted but safe. Thomas gathered his daughter in his arms, holding her tight as relief crashed over him in waves. "Thank you," he said, looking up at the woman who'd saved his daughter's life. "I don't know how to thank you. I forgot her inhaler at home and I thought... "You don't have to explain," the woman said softly, wiping her eyes. "I understand." Thomas noticed she was crying now, tears streaming down her face despite her attempt to smile. "Are you okay?" he asked. She nodded, but her hands were still shaking as she put her inhaler back in her purse. "I'm sorry. It's just... I lost someone once, to an asthma attack. My little sister. I was 16, she was 9. We were at the beach and I couldn't find her inhaler in time." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with old grief. Thomas felt his throat tighten. "I'm so sorry." Her name was Lily, the woman continued, as if the floodgates had opened and she couldn't stop the words from pouring out. "It was 12 years ago, but sometimes it feels like yesterday. I carry an inhaler everywhere now, even though I don't have asthma. I kept thinking that maybe someday I could help someone the way I couldn't help her." Emma, still weak but recovering, reached out her small hand and placed it on the woman's arm. "I'm sorry about Lily," she said in her soft voice. "Thank you for helping me." The woman let out a sob and gently squeezed Emma's hand. "Thank you for letting me." They sat there for a moment, 3 strangers connected by crisis and compassion, while the world bustled around them. Finally, Thomas helped Emma to her feet. "Can I at least buy you a coffee or dinner? I feel like thank you isn't enough." The woman smiled, wiping her eyes. "Coffee sounds nice. I'm Sophie, by the way." "Sophie Harrison." "Thomas Chen, and this brave girl is Emma." They made their way to the coffee shop in the mall, Emma holding both their hands. As they walked, Thomas noticed people staring at Sophie, whispering. He assumed they were looking at her expensive clothes, the kind that screamed money and privilege. Little did he know that several people were pulling out their phones, recognizing the woman who'd just saved his daughter's life. Over coffee, Sophie and Emma talked about their favorite books. Emma was delighted to discover that Sophie loved the same fantasy series she did. Thomas watched his daughter's eyes light up as she discussed dragons and magic with this elegant stranger, and he felt something shift in his chest. It had been so long since he'd seen Emma this animated with anyone besides him. "My dad reads them to me every night," Emma said proudly. "Even the boring parts with all the talking." Sophie laughed. "Those aren't boring, they're called character development." "That's what Dad says." Emma giggled. As the conversation flowed, Thomas found himself opening up about the challenges of single parenthood. How he worked 2 jobs as a freelance graphic designer and a weekend barista to make ends meet. How he'd given up his apartment to move in with his retired parents, so Emma could have more support. Sophie listened with genuine interest, asking questions, nodding with understanding. What Thomas didn't know was that Sophie was listening with more than just polite interest. She was the daughter of Richard Harrison, CEO of Harrison Industries, one of the largest pharmaceutical companies in the country. She'd grown up with every advantage money could buy. But after losing her sister, she'd struggled with guilt and purpose. Her father had given her a position in his company, but she'd always felt like she was just playing at having meaning in her life. Until today, until she'd actually saved someone. They talked for over an hour before Sophie glanced at her watch. "I'm sorry, I have to go. I have a meeting with my father." "Of course," Thomas said, standing. "Thank you again, Sophie. You gave me back my daughter today." Sophie hugged Emma goodbye, holding on perhaps a moment longer than necessary. As she turned to leave, she paused. "Thomas, what kind of graphic design do you do?" He shrugged, a little embarrassed. "Mostly logo design, website layouts, marketing materials, whatever pays the bills." She pulled a business card from her purse and wrote something on the back. "Email me your portfolio. My father's company is always looking for creative talent, and we believe in supporting good people." Thomas took the card, his fingers brushing against hers. "You don't have to do that." "I know," Sophie said with a smile. "But I want to. Sometimes good things should happen to good people." As Sophie walked away, Emma tugged on Thomas's sleeve. "Dad, I like her. She's nice." "She is, sweetheart. She really is." What happened next, Thomas would later say, felt like something out of a movie. He emailed his portfolio to Sophie that evening, not expecting much. 3 days later, he received a call from Harrison Industries' HR department, offering him an interview for their senior graphic design position. The salary they mentioned was more than he made in both his jobs combined, with benefits that included excellent health insurance. The interview was scheduled for the following week, and Thomas was nervous enough that he bought a new tie, his first in 3 years. When he arrived at the gleaming Harrison Industries tower downtown, he was directed to the top floor. The receptionist led him to a conference room where Sophie was waiting, along with an older gentleman in an expensive suit. "Thomas, this is my father." "Richard Harrison," Sophie said, her smile warm but professional. "Dad, this is the man I told you about." Richard Harrison stood and shook Thomas's hand with a firm grip. "My daughter tells me you're talented, hard-working, and one of the kindest people she's ever met. She also tells me you saved her life." Thomas blinked in confusion. "Sir, I think there's been a misunderstanding. Sophie saved my daughter's life." Richard looked at his daughter, who was wiping her eyes again. "Sophie?" he asked gently. Sophie took a shaky breath. "For 12 years, I've carried around guilt about Lily. I've carried that inhaler everywhere, hoping for a chance to make up for what I couldn't do. When I saw Emma struggling to breathe, it was like the universe was giving me a second chance. But what I didn't expect was how much it would heal something broken inside me." She turned to Thomas. "You didn't just let me help your daughter. You let me forgive myself. You gave me my purpose back. So yes, Dad's right. You did save my life, just in a different way." The room was silent for a moment before Richard spoke again. "We've reviewed your portfolio, Thomas. You're exactly what we're looking for. But more importantly, you're the kind of person we want in our company. Someone who prioritizes what matters. Someone who raises a daughter with compassion and grace. The job is yours if you want it." Thomas felt tears prickling his eyes. "I don't know what to say." "Say yes," Sophie said softly. "And maybe say you'll have dinner with me sometime. Not for business, just because I'd really like to get to know you and Emma better." Thomas looked at this woman who'd crashed into his life during his darkest moment, who'd saved his daughter, and was now offering him a future he'd barely dared to dream about. He thought about Emma's words. "I like her, Dad. She's nice." Yes, he said, to all of it. 6 months later, Thomas stood in that same mall, holding Sophie's hand as they watched. Emma participated in an asthma awareness event sponsored by Harrison Industries. The program provided free inhalers and education to families who couldn't afford them, a project Sophie had championed in Lily's memory. Emma was handing out purple ribbons to attendees, her own purple inhaler clipped proudly to her belt. She was wearing a t-shirt that read Lily's Legacy. It part of Sophie's foundation that had helped hundreds of children since its launch. You know what the best part is? Sophie said, leaning her head on Thomas's shoulder. What's that? I came to this mall that day because I was running away from a board meeting. I felt so lost, so purposeless. I was just wandering around, trying to figure out what I was doing with my life. She squeezed his hand. And then I found you. Both of you. Thomas kissed the top of her head. We found each other. Emma ran over to them, breathless with excitement. Sophie, Dad, we ran out of ribbons. We need more. As Sophie hurried off to get more supplies, Thomas watched her go. This woman who'd entered their lives as a stranger and had become so much more. He thought about that terrifying day, about how close he'd come to losing everything, and how one act of kindness had transformed not just his life, but Sophie's too. Sometimes, he realized, the people we save end up saving us right back. And sometimes the worst moments of our lives lead us exactly where we're meant to be, into the arms of people who understand our scars, because they have matching ones of their own. Emma took his hand. Dad, Sophie says we're a family now. Is that true? Thomas looked at his daughter, then at Sophie, who was laughing as she tried to carry too many boxes of ribbons at once, and he felt his heart swell with gratitude for a forgotten inhaler, a chance meeting, and the incredible power of human kindness. Yes, sweetheart, he said, his voice thick with emotion. We're a family. And in that moment, surrounded by purple ribbons and second chances, Thomas understood that sometimes the greatest miracles don't come from having everything go right. Sometimes they come from the connections we make when everything goes wrong, from the strangers who become saviors, and from the courage to let people in even when life has taught us how quickly we can lose them. Sophie had carried that inhaler for 12 years, waiting for redemption. Thomas had carried his grief and his responsibilities alone, afraid to let anyone share the weight. And Emma, brave little Emma, had simply needed to breathe. Together they'd found something none of them had been looking for, but all of them desperately needed. A second chance at family, at purpose, at love. The mall lights flickered overhead, the same lights that had witnessed their first meeting, and Thomas smiled. Because sometimes, in the most ordinary places, extraordinary things happen. Sometimes kindness creates ripples that turn into waves. And sometimes, when you least expect it, a single moment of compassion can change everything.